Hello, everybody, and happy Hanukkah. If you'd like to support my work financially, then donations are welcome. Please send to yaelunterman@gmail.com. That's my PayPal address. So I want to start with a fascinating question. Well, it's fascinating to me, I hope for you too, which is why were the Maccabees and the whole Hanukkah story omitted from our holy books? You'd expect stories that led to national liberation and an 8-day festival to take up space inside our holy books. Let's remind ourselves first of the facts. The Maccabees were a group of Jewish rebel warriors who took control of Judea from the Seleucid Greeks. They were led by the priest Matityahu, who was a Hasmonean from Modi'in, and his 5 sons, and they founded the Hasmonean kingdom. And that was the last time there was a Jewish state in this area before modern times. Now, to commemorate the victory and the rededication of the temple with the miracle of the oil that lasted 8 days, the Hanukkah festival was integrated in the 2nd century BCE, around the year 167 BCE. Now we get to the point. While Purim appears in the Tanakh with the book of Esther, Hanukkah and the book of Maccabees doesn't appear in the Tanakh. It wasn't included in the biblical canon. There is a book called the Book of Maccabees, but it's in the Apocrypha. It's not in the actual Tanakh itself. And what about later? What about the Talmud, the vast compendium of Jewish life? Do we find the story of Hanukkah in it? Well, yes and no. How many times does the word Maccabee appear? 0, I think. Matityahu, 1. There are a couple of dozen discussions of the Hasmonean dynasty, but what about Hanukkah itself? In the Mishnah, Hanukkah barely appears. If you were to read the Mishnah, you wouldn't really know what Hanukkah was. And then you turn to the Gemara, which is thousands of pages about all aspects of Jewish life. We'd expect to see Hanukkah there, right? Well, not really. I mean, it is mentioned a bit in terms of the connection with lighting the candles and things like that. But if you want to know what the actual story of Hanukkah is, you have one place to look in the Gemara, and that's in Tractate Shabbat 21b, a few lines beginning with a question, my Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah? So here's my question, which is why so little airtime for Hanukkah? Well, we can give several political and historical explanations. Let me give you a couple. One of them is that the Hasmoneans were aligned with a group called the Sadducees, the Tzdukim, and the Talmud was aligned with the other group, which is the Pharisees, the Prushim. We're all inheritors to the Pharisee tradition. And so politically, they were on opposite sides, and the Talmud didn't want to give them airspace. A second possibility is a practical suggestion that the Lubavitcher Rebbe gives, which is that the Mishnah's purpose was to write down stuff that was being forgotten at the time. Even though it was oral law, it needed to be written down. But the Hasmonean, the whole Hanukkah story was such recent history that there was no need to write it down in the Mishnah. Everybody knew it. So that's just a practical reason. But a third reason that's more interesting to me today is that these Hasmoneans of the Hanukkah story, they were Levites. They were of the tribe of Levi. And the thing is that the kings of Judea, of Yehudah, are supposed to be from the tribe of Judah. So that's a problem. And the Khatam Sofer notes that the compiler of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, he was a descendant of King David and the line of Judah. And he viewed these Hasmoneans, who became rulers when they weren't supposed to, as sinful usurpers. And so he didn't want to include them in the Mishnah. He did that deliberately. Okay, so we've begun the discussion. We're starting to understand that kings are supposed to come from Judah. On Jacob's deathbed blessing to Judah, he says, Lo yasur shevet miYehuda. The kingly scepter should not move from the tribe of Judah. Okay, and the Hasmoneans are from the tribe of Levi. They're an aberration. Levites are not supposed to rule, and yet the Hasmoneans did rule. First as rulers and then even calling themselves kings. And the thing is that God let them, so to speak. God gave them success when they rose up against the Greeks and then went to rule. And they had a dynasty that lasted for 103 years. So it seems to have worked. Well, not really, because this dynasty ended up collapsing in a cloud of corruption and civil war. And it wasn't really a success at all. So what I'd like to do is try and get some insight now into why it had to be specifically Levites who had to propel forward this whole historical process of the Hanukkah story. And now to do that, I want to go back to the beginning and follow what I'm going to call the Levi Spark down history. The idea here is that certain spiritual traits come down the line from our ancestors to us. And I believe that we can see this happening both in the Tanakh and also with us today. I'm going to speak about the Levi Spark, and it's going to be comprised of two things: fiery zeal and also music. And where does it all begin? Well, you might think that the Levi Spark begins with the birth of Levi, but I'm actually going to take us back a little bit further than that. This is a little bit of a drush. It's not quite obvious literal meaning, but bear with me. I'm going back to a person called Yuval. He was one of those very early descendants of Adam. Here we see in the verse, Bereshit 4, and his brother's name was Yuval. He was the father of all who handle the harp and pipe. In other words, he was basically the father of music, okay? Now, what's interesting is that 3 of the 4 letters of his name actually spell Levi, okay, Lamed Vav Yud. His name is actually an anagram of Bert Levi. So here begins musical skill, which will in the future be a major part of Levi's role with the Levites singing in the Bet HaMikdash. Music is used to accompany events and rituals, and the word accompany in Hebrew is also Levi. Levaya, a funeral, you accompany the dead, lelavot, to accompany. And that's where the name comes from, as we're going to see in a second, at his birth. Now, before that, I just want to mention Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman of Braslav, a very famous Hasidic rabbi with some really, really interesting ideas, not always completely clear, but they definitely spark your imagination and you want to know more. And he says something here, which is, in the main, song comes from the aspect of the tribe of Levi, who were conductors of song. They were descendants of Leah. And when Levi was born, it was said, this time my husband, Yelaver, will become attached to me. For with the birth of Levi, who is the element of music, came attraction, that her husband would be attached and attracted, drawn to her. Therefore, song has the power to attract. Okay, so we'll get to the second part in a second, but just the fact that he says, in the main, song comes from the aspect of the tribe of Levi, just for me strengthens the idea that with Yuval, who was the father of all music, the spark then bounced down and came into Levi. Okay, so why is Rabbi Nachman talking here about attraction? Well, you know, you have a look at the story of Leah. She was the less beloved wife of Jacob, and she hoped to gain her husband's love through having children. Now, you see in Bereshit 29, when she has her first son, Reuven, she's all excited, and she says, now, therefore, my husband will love me. But it doesn't work. And then she has another son, Shimon, and she's still a bit hopeful. And by the time she gets to Levi, she really hopes that the magic number 3 is going to work. And she says these words, now this time will my husband accompany me or become attached or connected or joined to me because I've borne him 3 sons. So she calls his name Levi. But I think she knows inside herself that it's not really working. And then when she gets to the 4th son, Judah, she even stops mentioning her husband and she just says, this time I will thank God. So what's the point I'm trying to make here? That Levi grows up under this shadow of this disappointed mother, this rejected mother. Now, what might a child who grows up with a disappointed and unloved mother develop into? Might they not internalize all of that pain and rejection and then externalize it in anger and maybe even in violence? So I want to suggest that this might explain Levi's development into a fighting guy. And we see this fighting guy when we move forward to the next story, which is that of Dinah, Yaakov's only daughter. You remember she goes out of her family safety zone and she is seen by the son of a local king, Shechem, and he likes her and he takes her by force physically, but then he takes a liking to her and he wants to marry her. So he comes to her father, Yaakov, and he makes a very generous offer. Yaakov's sons say, well, but we need you all to be circumcised because that's our custom. And those men agree, the men of Shechem, and they circumcise themselves. And after that, they're very weak. And at that point, Shimon and Levi swoop in and they massacre all of those men when they're very weak and vulnerable. And they grab their sister Dinah and they take her home. Yaakov's very upset. He says, "You've made me odious amongst the locals." But they reply in defense, "Hakazonaya said, achotenu, will our sister be made like a prostitute?" So Shimon and Levi, right, Leah's second and third sons, together show a fiery nature here of zeal and violence. And how are they shaped by this story? What do their lives look like afterwards? Well, we don't know much, but we do see later Yosef deliberately imprisons Shimon, but not Levi. And why? Well, maybe Yosef, who was very sensitive and intuitive, he knew that they were actually a bit different. Maybe Levi potentially could do tshuva and could repent, whereas Shimon was a harder-hearted character. Maybe he just wanted to separate them. We do see that on Jacob's deathbed, when he blesses the sons, and the blessings are blessings because they're not really so blessingy. We see that he says Shimon and Levi are brothers. Okay, he lumps them together, and then he says these very, strong things. "Oh, my soul, do not come into their counsel, for in their anger they slew a man. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." Now, these words, "I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel," on the one hand might mean I need to divide the two of them. Shimon and Levi, they have a bad influence on each other. But another possibility is very interesting, that it's a prophecy for the future. With these words, "I will scatter them in Israel," he prophesies the fact that when the tribes are given their own parcels of land, Shimon and Levi both have an exceptional thing happen. Shimon's parcel of land, which he's given, ends up being swallowed into Judah. So he doesn't really end up with his own parcel of land properly. But more interesting even is Levi. Levi doesn't get a plot of land. What he gets is 48 cities scattered throughout Israel, of which 6 are even cities of refuge that manslaughterers, people accused of killing people on a degree slightly lower than murder through accidents or whatever, they can come and flee to these cities of refuge. And I think it's very interesting that Levi's cities are scattered throughout Israel. I think this is the beginning of the containment of Levi's fiery nature, but the use of it for the good. What do I mean? When you scatter something, then it's not as strong as when it's all together, but you're also scattering it throughout. You're enabling different parts of the country to benefit from Levi's zeal, okay, but in small measure, and it's scattered across the country. Plus, they were in charge of these cities of refuge. They themselves, Levi, were a tribe that descended from somebody who had slaughtered a whole city, right, Shechem. And therefore, who better to take in these manslaughterers and educate them? Okay, somebody who's been through it themselves and has come out and has transformed. So this is the beginning of, I want to suggest, Levi doing tshuva for his earlier violent deeds here. Perhaps he even hears Yaakov's harsh words to both of them, Shimon and himself, and he's shocked and jolted into doing tshuva. Because from then on, Shimon and Levi's destinies diverge incredibly. Levi's descendants just take center stage. Levi's daughter Yocheved marries his grandson Amram, and the two of them have these 3 amazing children: Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, the highest prophet and lawgiver, the high priest, the prophetess and water giver. And this family is just an amazing family now from Levi. And Shimon, where is he? And also from this family, Lahavdil, we have Korach, who is a rebel, but he's also showing this same fiery spark that's coming down into the Levi family from this violent nature, which is being rectified and turned into leadership. And the Levi family is showing leadership and rebellion. And so it's appearing, the spark is appearing in both positive and slightly less positive ways, and more of that later. But wait, I'm talking to you about a fiery spark of zeal, of kind of violence and fierceness, but I'm also talking to you about a musical spark that's coming down at the same time through Levi, the two of them together. Where is the musical spark at this point? Well, it seems to lie latent for a while in Egypt, but after the Exodus and the splitting of the sea, all of a sudden we see it burst forth in the song at the sea. As you recall, we have as Yashir, Moshe and Israel singing this amazing song. And afterwards, Miriam takes tambourines and goes dancing and singing with the women. So here is that musical spark emerging at this point in Levite history. I just want to make an interesting side point, because you might ask, what's the connection between music and this fiery zeal? Why are they coming down in the same family, in the same spark? Well, if any of you have ever read The Clockwork Orange, which was afterwards also turned into a film, but in the book, there's this character called Alex, and he's very violent. And eventually in the book, spoiler, okay, the violence he gets therapized out of this violence. They manage to get it out of him. But when that goes, at the same time, his love for classical music also disappears. So that author has made a connection between this violence and this music. And, you know, bringing the two together, I think, is really interesting, because that's what's going on here with Levi. Let me continue. The next thing that happens is the golden calf. When Moshe comes down and sees those Israelites dancing around this idol, he's enraged. And by the way, Moshe himself has that fierce spark. We see him acting, you know, with righteous anger. And we also see him doing things maybe a little bit impulsively, killing the Egyptian back in Egypt, which ended up getting him into trouble, even though it was the right thing to do, hitting the rock. All of these things could be discussed as part of Moshe's fierce Levi personality. Anyway, as he sees this idol, he comes down, he breaks the 2 tablets, he burns the calf in fire, he grinds it to a powder, he scatters it in water, and he makes the people drink it. But then what happens after that is even stronger, which is that he stands at the gate and he says, Mila Hashem Elai, whoever is to God should come to me. And all the Levites gather themselves together. Notice who's coming? The Levites. And then in some of the harshest words of the Torah, God says, every man must take his sword and go from gate to gate and slay every man, his brother, his companion, his neighbor. And the Levites do this, and 3,000 men are killed on that day. So what's happening here? There's a need for people who can get up and do really difficult and violent deeds for the sake of God. And these people are not from the tribe of Judah, they're from Levi. So we see Levi stepping into the forefront and becoming God's servants. And at this time, the group that was meant to be originally God's servants, which is the firstborns, they're replaced. They lose their status, and the Leviim step in. They're now going to guard the Mishkan. They're going to carry the Aron, the Ark, and the vessels. And in the future, their musical spark is going to express itself fabulously when they become the singers in the Bet HaMikdash, in the temple. Now, if you take the Kohanim, the priests, which is a subset of the Levites, the spark is going to emerge in the fact that they'll work with the sacrifices. They're going to spend their days surrounded by blood and killing animals. Now, you need a certain kind of nature for that, a nature that can handle the violence of Shechita. And this is what they channeled into the service of God. Okay, we're told, the Talmud says that a person who's born under the sign of Mars, meaning they're bloodthirsty, should go and become a butcher, meaning they should channel it into a more constructive path. And so too, these Kohanim, priests, the violent warrior spark in Levi gets channeled into the temple service. The Talmud states that priests were known to have strong and arrogant natures and to be bad-tempered. And the Maharal explains that's because they have this fire of holiness burning within them, and it boils over. This is all the more interesting because the ancestor of the priest, the original high priest Aaron, was famous for being a peacemaker, which seems to be the exact opposite of this fiery spark. And I'm aware of that, and a suggestion that I can make is that sometimes sparks skip a generation, or perhaps that there was something about the fiery spark and zeal which made him so nervous that he just went to the opposite extreme. I don't know about that, but Aaron's definitely different than the rest of the family that I'm describing here. Now, let's have a look at Aaron's grandson, though, Pinchas. The Levite zeal shows up in a major way in the story of Pinchas. Now, Pinchas is a Cohen, a priest, who kills 2 adulterers and stops a plague happening because of it. Okay, if you have a look here, it says, behold, one of the people of Israel, who we find out is Zimri, the prince of Shimon, came and brought near to his brothers a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses. Okay, so these 2 people were having relations in public, and all the Israelites were weeping at the tent of meeting. And Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, right, sees this. He gets up, he takes a javelin, and he spears these 2 people. And so the plague ceases. It's very interesting that this adulterer from Shimon is from the tribe of Shimon. And that means that these 2 brothers who were once so united that Jacob called them Shimon v'Levi Achim, Shimon and Levi are brothers, they're now on opposite sides. Pinchas is on the side of the good, the side of God, and the prince of Shimon, unfortunately, is on the side of not godly behavior, shall we say. Now, the name of the prince of Shimon is Zimri. Zimri means my music. Okay, Zemer means music, Zimri means my music. And so Pinchas's music, Levi's music, is used for God, for Hashem, but Shimon's music is not. Shimon's music is perverted. Pinchas needs to eliminate this music. We saw earlier that Rabbi Nachman explains that music is about attraction, about joining 2 things together. Leah calls him Levi, hoping to attract her husband and join them together. And this is why Rabbi Nachman says we play music at weddings, to have attraction there. But he also says that some songs come from the bad side. That's why they have to be sung on Shabbat in order to elevate them. So music is not always positive. And so Zimri carries this dark music in him. His name means my music, which means music of the individual, not of the collective, music that the individual wants to express and play, no matter what that's going to affect, how that's going to affect other people. Zimri wants to indulge in a private act of lust, but God brings down a plague on all of them. And so Pinchas has to come in and eliminate that kind of music. Now let's return to the Hasmoneans. They are clearly behaving as Levites. The book of Macabees 1 tells us that when Greek soldiers showed up in Modi'in and demanded that the Jews sacrifice a pig to the pagan god, a Jewish Hellenist, assimilated person, volunteers to do it. And Matityahu, from the family of Hasmonean priests, is outraged, and he kills the man and the Greek soldiers around him. Let's quickly look at that. So here we have the book of Maccabees, and here we have the story. And Matityahu answers with a loud voice, I and my sons and my nation, we walk in the covenant of our ancestors. God forbid we should abandon our laws. And when he sees this Hellenized Jew going up to sacrifice a pig on the altar, Matityahu is enraged with zeal. His body trembled. He couldn't hold his anger back. He ran and slew him and killed the king's commissioner. He acted in zeal. And look at this. He cried throughout the city with a loud voice, whoever is zealous for the Torah and observes the covenant, let them follow me. And he and his sons fled to the mountains. Interesting, because not everyone knows this side of the Hanukkah story. Okay, it's a little bit ironic. People think that Hanukkah is this lovely, nice, candle-filled family holiday with lots of fattening foods that doesn't demand a lot from us. But it's actually not as touchy-feely as you think. And there is this, very violent story, which if it happened today would be extremely disturbing. And it's at the root of Hanukkah. And it's a little bit of a paradox here. And it's important to be aware of it. Anyway, Matityahu and his 5 sons flee to the nearby caves, and they become the core of a guerrilla fighting unit. Now, there's an obvious similarity to the Pinchas story here with the use of the word kaneh, jealous, zealous. It's used a lot. And Matityahu also calls the people to him. He says, whoever is zealous for the Torah and observes the covenant, let them follow me. This reminds us a bit of Moshe's call, Mila Hashem Elai, whoever is on God's side, come to me. And in fact, Josephus says that Matityahu in other places actually used the phrase Mila Hashem Elai. So there's a very strong line of connection from these Maccabees to Pinchas and also to Moshe under the title of Levite zealotry, the fiery spark of zealousness, all in the service of God. And even the trait of rebellion that we see in Korach earlier shows up in the Hasmoneans here. And it's used for the good, because every spark, every trait can be used for both the good or the bad. So they're acting here in pure Levite fashion, and they're purifying this trait. So to really start summing up now, we know that the Hanukkah story is a mixture of a military victory over oppressors and also a spiritual miracle involving the temple. Okay, of course, the finding of the oil lasting for 8 days. So what I'm suggesting is that there's this Levite spark that came down the generations from the original father of all music, Yuval, down to Levi and to his descendants, and that this was exactly the right combination that was needed for the Hanukkah story. Okay, even the decision that the Hasmoneans made that they had to fight on Shabbat because they saw they were being slaughtered, and they realized, pikuach nefesh, we have to fight on Shabbat so that we can survive and win this war, shows that they were very close to the interpretation of Torah, the teaching of halacha. And this is also a Levite thing, because the Levites, the priests, the Siftei Kohen, they were the teachers of the people. And so these Hasmoneans are just being fully Levite here. And Levi repented for the negative aspects of his violence. He did tshuva, and we're told that a repentant person can actually stand higher than even a perfect saint. Why is that? Well, one possible suggestion is that the repentant person had a passion, they had a drive, and they expressed it. Okay, so there's energy out in the world, and then they were able to take that energy and turn it into the good. The saint didn't have that drive, or perhaps, kept it very much down in their personality, and therefore that drive and that energy is not harnessed to the good. Okay, so the repentant person has the higher level there, and Levi has this powerful energy to use here for the good. Now, it's true that Yehuda also did tshuva. He also repented after Tamar showed him the error of his ways. And we see him develop and approach Yosef and take responsibility. But he's not the same kind of warrior personality. And he was also not connected to the temple. And therefore, he was, being destined for monarchy and kingship. He was not a good fit for the Hanukkah story. The Hanukkah story required zealotry, required a kind of a more informal warfare, this guerrilla warfare, and then it required this miracle involving the temple. And all of that was a fit for the Levites and not for Judah. Okay, and this, this answers the question of why were the Levites the ones to step in and propel forward the Hanukkah story, as we asked the question at the beginning. But hold on, now what about the musical spark here in the Maccabees, in the Hasmoneans? Where is it? Well, I'm not sure, but I could suggest that this does lead us into the final warning note here, which is that God gave the Hasmoneans victory and even allowed them to rule, but ultimately they didn't have what it takes to rule. The Levi Spark is not meant for rulership, and so they ended up falling into corruption, which we can call bad music, like Zimri, corrupted music, okay? Music is a powerful force for good when used correctly, but can also be an influence for the dark side. So what's possible is that the Hasmoneans, after they'd been given this victory by God and found themselves in a rulership position, maybe they should have then stepped down and given that rulership over to somebody from the tribe of Judah, which is the rightful rulers. Okay, there's a reason why in the Jewish political structure, we have the Kohen, and the priest, and we also have the Melech, the king. It's two different roles. They're not supposed to come together. And so what we learn from this is a very deep lesson that everybody should play to their strengths and not try and take somebody else's role. And if you see there's somebody else who would do something better than you, then it would be good for you to step away from that and let them do it, even if it's a personal sacrifice. Okay. And so what I'm saying is that on Hanukkah, as we light candles, we can think about the fiery passion of the Levi spark and how it's supposed to be used for the sake of heaven. And we can also remember the Levites by accompanying our Hanukkah candle lighting with songs, with Haneret Halalu and Maoz Tzur, just as they accompanied the temple rituals with music. And when we sing the Hallel, which is the essence of Hanukkah, which is days of singing, praise, and thanks, then we remember this musical spark in the Levites. And as we think about the Hasmoneans, we can also think about sparks that have come down to us from our own ancestors. And we can pray that we use those gifts correctly and precisely and well, but we don't try and be something that we're not. And we have the humility to hand over roles which are not meant for us to somebody else who can do them better. So thank you very much for being with me. I hope these ideas are inspiring, and happy Hanukkah to everybody.